So thank you everybody again for joining this afternoon. Today, I have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about some updates that have gone on to the Workbench that you may or may not have noticed. This was just in the last week that this was pushed to the Workbench, so we wanted to be sure to kind of give an opportunity to talk through what's changed and what hasn't changed, how it may affect you, and also a little bit of a live walkthrough of it. Before I get into that, though, just for those people who may be new on the call and have not seen me before, my name is Gage Ryan. I'm a part of the research support team for the Data Research Center with the All of Us research program. So primarily what that looks like is I help make the research support materials on the user support hub, as well as host these office hours, and then also answer questions through the help desk when you guys submit tickets. So just so you guys can put a face to the name sometimes. And I'm also joined by my colleague Henry Condon on the call today too. So he's a big piece of our team as well. And so if you do have questions and you put them in the chat, he'll be sure to try to answer them too as well. Okay, so for today, here's just our quick agenda of what I like to go through. So we're going to take a look at the overview of the storage options, how they were before, and how they are now, and what that looks like as far as the similarities and differences between the two. Then I'll do a couple slides quickly of the overview of how to use them or the usage of these storage options. Then I'll just have a slide to show you a little bit of information about what the cost looks like associated with these different storage systems. And then, like I said, hopefully we'll get a live walkthrough going, and then you guys can ask some questions. So this is what the storage options used to look like. And so as you see, we had 3 different available options when you started a standard environment. You had your persistent disk, you had your standard disk, and you had your workspace bucket. So for those who've been working in the Workbench for a little bit, probably know these different options. For those of you who are new, you may not know them, but that's okay because it's changed. So what has changed? First, we're going to talk about standard environments. So this is just when you're running general analysis. So what's changed is we've gotten rid of the standard disk option. What options do we have? We have a persistent disk and we have the workspace bucket option. And I've got some points here of what these two features are, how they compare to each other. And so your persistent disk will be your default storage location. So if you just type any general saving command, it's going to automatically go to there. The persistent disk is specific to you as the researcher and to that particular workspace. It is permanent storage, so it will stay there even after you may delete your environment or stop working for an extended amount of time. And the best way to picture this is like a USB thumb drive. And so the reason you think of it this way is because you basically plug it in to your virtual machine when you go to start doing analysis. And then when you're finished, you pull it out. And the thing is here is that it's one of the big differences between it and the workspace bucket is it's not shareable. So what does that mean is it's only to you. So if you save files to it, only you as the researcher can access those files. And then to see what's going on, you can access your files from in the persistent disk straight from the Jupyter notebook by running commands, or you can access it through the Jupyter interface. Okay, and then on the right side of your screen, we have the workspace bucket. And so this is attached to your workspace. And like I said, the difference between the persistent disk and the workspace bucket is the workspace bucket is actually shareable. So if you save files to your workspace, and that workspace is shared with a colleague, that colleague also has access to the workspace bucket. So they could pull those files back and forth. So it's a great permanent storage system for sharing files. It's a little bit not as straightforward as far as when it goes to saving. We have some pre-built code snippets on how to send files up to the workspace bucket and also how to bring them back down. And I'll get a chance to kind of walk through that. But so kind of sorry about what is the difference now, what has happened. So like I said, there was a standard disk option in here before, and we have gotten rid of that. So how does this affect you as the user? Now permanent storage is easier because it's automatic no matter what you're saving to, whether the persistent disk or the workspace bucket, both of them are permanent storage. But then to tag off of that is now that both of these are permanent storage, that means there's storage costs involved. So just as a researcher, it's important to be cognizant of what files you are saving. And, if you probably don't need that file anymore, go ahead and go into your persistent disk or your workspace bucket and remove it. That way you're not being charged storage costs for something that you don't necessarily need. So now we're going to talk about data proc environments. So the Workbench has two environments that you can spin up from the cloud analysis window. First one being the standard environment, which we just talked about, and then the second one being the data proc cluster environment. And I think I have a slide next that talks, the difference between the two. But so here, the storage options for a data proc environment are a little different. You still have the workspace bucket option for permanent storage. However, persistent disks are not compatible with a data proc environment currently. So we still have the standard disk involved here. And so for those who've worked in the Workbench before, kind of understand what the standard disk is. But for those who are new, I'll go ahead and explain it a little bit. The standard disk acts as the same as persistent disk on basically across the board, except that it's not permanent storage. So when you go to delete your environment, the standard disk is also deleted. So that's the difference between the persistent disk and standard disk is the standard disk goes away. You can think of it as scratch storage. Other than that, all the features between that and the persistent disk are basically the same. And then also the workspace bucket is compatible with data proc environments. So if you are looking to do permanent storage, you'll want to leverage the workspace bucket. And so how does this affect you as a user? It does not affect you if you have been working in data proc environments previously. There is no change to this currently. There may be in the future, but right now, no change. So like I said, just a brief overview of the difference between the two types of environments we have being standard environment or data proc cluster environment. And here I've got on each side kind of what the use cases are for them. So standard environments typically used for most of the analysis for general phenotypic data when you're using just standard R and Python coding language, or if you want to use a workflow like tsub, Nextflow, Cromwell, and it's good for running single jobs. Then the data proc cluster is definitely leveraged more when you're working with genomic data, especially using Hail, Spark, or you want to run parallel jobs. And so now I'm just going to give a couple different pieces of the overview and the usage of the persistent disk and the standard disk. So like I said before, functionality wise, these two match up. They basically are the same thing, except that the persistent disk is permanent storage. The standard disk goes away when you delete your environment. And so I can talk about these basically one and the same. Is they both are the default storage location. So if you don't direct the file anywhere else, it's going to automatically go to the persistent disk in a standard environment, or it's going to go to the standard disk in a data proc environment. It is specific to that environment. And then so, yeah, you can use saving commands without directing. Files can be listed using commands or located in the Jupyter window. And this is the staging area. This is the storage area where you must put a file if you do desire to download it onto a local device. And so I just put in a couple images of what that looks like, but we'll also have a walkthrough too. But here's an example of what a standard saving command looks like. ggsave surveyplot.png. Don't need to do anything else. Automatically goes to either the persistent disk or the standard disk. And then as you can see, you could just list the files right here in the Jupyter notebook and see what's in either of those disks. And then you also have the capability of using point and click tools to look at these files too as well. So you could click the Jupyter icon here. It'll open up a couple files. You'll go deep a little bit deeper by clicking on workspaces, and then you'll get to see what all is saved within that workspace. So now talking about the usage of the workspace bucket. So like I said, this requires you to use some code to get things back and forth from the workspace bucket, but we've pre-built the code snippets to do this to make things a little bit easier. And we are still refining them too to make them even a little more user-friendly. So there might be an update to those in the near future. And so this is specific to the workspace. So like I said, so if you send a file up to the workspace bucket, now it's accessible for anybody who has access to this workspace. It is permanent storage. It is shareable, and then files can be moved between notebooks too as well. So that's a great benefit to it is if you're working on one notebook, you want to save a data frame, you can send it up to the workspace bucket. You can open a new notebook and bring that data frame into that new notebook as long as it's in the same workspace. So what that kind of looks like, the code snippets here is right here from the toolbar in the Jupyter notebook. You can click snippets. Then you have some drop-down menus and it'll walk you through what you want to select. So you want to run a setup function first that makes sure the right libraries nested in there and downloaded. Then the next piece you'll run is you want to copy a file from up to the workspace bucket. It puts out all this code. All you got to do is read through and see where it tells you to change some things. Then you can run the code and it'll get sent up there. And so just a couple takeaways here is what are we looking at? So we've got standard disk option, persistent disk option, workspace bucket option. Okay, how do these apply to the different environments? So in a standard environment, your options are only persistent disk and workspace bucket. In a data proc environment, your options are only standard disk and workspace bucket. Okay, so which ones of these are permanent storage? Persistent disk, workspace bucket are the permanent storage pieces, and then which ones are shareable? Only the workspace bucket. So lastly, talk a little bit about cost because that's important to people. And just to reiterate, if you are new to the Workbench or if you haven't heard this before, there is no cost associated with joining the Workbench, the researcher Workbench. There is no cost even associated with your institution to sign a contract, and there is no cost to use the point and click tools, being the cohort builder or the dataset builder. The only time cost starts being accumulated or associated with it is when you're using compute resources. That meaning when you spin up a cloud environment and you want to actually start working with the data. So now you've pulled the data from where it's stored in Google BigQuery and you're taking it in a SQL query down to a notebook. And now you want to actually start manipulating it. And then also there's some costs associated with storage. So that's kind of what's outlined here. And so I have this very basic equation here of what equals the cost. And this isn't always super specific, but this is a good general idea of how to understand it. Cost is equal to what type of data you're looking at, or more or less how much data you're looking at, the compute resources you're using, how much of those, the amount of time you're using them, and then also the storage. So I'll go through a couple of these images here. This first one here is the cloud analysis environment window. And as you can see, this is where you can go to change and customize your different compute settings, but it also gives you a preview of like how much it's going to cost to run your notebook per hour in an active environment state, or how much it's going to cost in a pause environment state. There will also be, if you're using a persistent disk, it'll say how much it costs to have that persistent disk per month. And then jumping over here to these other images. So let's say you're leveraging the workspace bucket. This is the price per gigabyte per month to use the workspace bucket. So it's going to be, rounded up to 3 cents per month per gigabyte to store files in the workspace bucket. And then looking down here at the bottom, there's the two options for the type of persistent disk you want, whether it's a standard persistent disk or a solid state drive persistent disk. And these are the prices to store, to use one of those per month. Now, here it shows it per gigabyte, but once you jump into the Workbench, you actually have to select how much you're going to pre-save. So for example, the least amount that you can select is 120 gigs. So that comes out to about $4.80. So if you want to say, using our thumb drive example, I want 120 gigabyte thumb drive persistent disk. It's going to cost me $4.80 per month to have that. And I can use up to the 120 gigs, or I could use a small amount. And then if you want to make that disk bigger, you can add more gigabytes to it. But yeah, so this is the main page of a workspace. Let's say you've either created cohorts, created data sets, whatever. Doesn't really matter too much. Right now, we just kind of want to talk about what's going on in these storage options. So this is a workspace in the register tier. So the only option I have is a standard general analysis option anyways. If you're working on the control tier, you'll then get the option to start a data prop cluster environment. But for our case today, we're just going to walk through doing a standard environment. So as I talked about before, because in a standard environment, you basically are required to attach a persistent disk, whether you use it or not, to the environment. You can see here, so it's 20 cents per hour to run this setup, this compute environment, and then it's 1 cent per hour in a pause state. And then also it's $4.80 per month to use and keep this standard persistent disk at 120 gigabytes. And one piece I'll add here is, let's say you don't ever plan on using the persistent disk, but we are requiring you to start an environment with one. When you go to delete your environment, it'll ask you, here, I'll just show you. So if I click here to delete my environment, it'll ask me, do I want to keep my persistent disk or delete it? Or down here, delete it. So if you keep it, that's when you'll get charged the $4.80 per month. If you don't plan on using it, if you don't want to use it, or if you just had files in it but you don't want them anymore, you can delete both the environment and the persistent disk, and you won't be charged that $4.80 per month. Okay, this is where you go. So in standard environment, before you start it up, you can click here, you can change some settings around, get ready to go, start your environment. So I've got one running already. Now I'm going to open up a notebook, just kind of give you guys an example of what this looks like in action. Okay, so what I want to show you here is how to leverage both the persistent disk and then also the workspace buckets when it comes to saving files, listing them, and also maybe accessing them through the interfaces that there are available to as well. So first thing I want to do is I just want to get some data into my notebook here, so that way we can work with it. So I just need to run a couple of commands here. I'm using R as my coding language. These are just some backup pieces that we need to get done, so that way we can write some SQL queries. So like I did here, I just loaded a couple of libraries. I set the workspace variable to pull in the CDR as data set. This is just a helper function for writing SQL queries. And then here, we're going to write our first SQL query, and it's going to bring in how many participants have data for each survey. So I'll let that run. Okay, finish running. All right, so what does it look like? As you see, we got quite big numbers for how many participants have response for each of these surveys. Plotted it out here. Okay, now to our first piece. So we're in a standard environment, so the persistent disk is attached. We already know that. You know what? I have the survey data frame that I just loaded. I know I want to save that because I want to use it later on and I don't want to query it again. And then I also want to save this plot for later use. So I could just use two simple saving commands here. This one's going to save the data frame. This one's going to save the plot. Boom, done. Okay, cool. Let me make sure that they are actually saved in my persistent disk. I can go ahead and run this command that lists the files. And yep, okay, so this is the name of our notebook. And then as you can see here, our files. We got survey data frame, you got survey plot. Okay, cool. That works for us. Okay, now let's say we don't want to use the persistent disk, or we have them saved in the persistent disk, but we also know our colleague who also shares this workspace wants to be able to access these files too. So let's use the code snippets to save it to the workspace bucket. So I'll start fresh to do that. Let me add a cell. Okay. So what does that look like? We're going to go to snippets. All of us are cloud storage snippets. The first one you'll want to run is setup. As you can see, that just makes sure it's the right libraries in place. I've actually already loaded this library, so I don't need to run the cell. Then you go to the second piece here is list objects in the workspace bucket. So if you want to see what's already in the workspace bucket, you could click this. It'll output a piece of code, so you could do that. But what we want to do is copy files to or from the workspace bucket. So we want to copy data to the workspace bucket here. So we're going to click this snippet. Reading through, as you can see, okay. The snippet assumes that you ran the setup first. This code saves your data frame into a CSV file in a data folder on a Google bucket or a workspace bucket. Same thing. So first thing we have to do is replace df with the name of your data frame. So let's replace df with survey df. Okay. Replace test.csv with the name of the file you're going to store in the bucket. So you can just use the same name. Survey underscore df.csv. Now the nice thing is we don't have to change anything from here. So we can run this. All right, and then it confirms that we have this saved as survey underscore df.csv in our workspace bucket. So this is the file path to it. And then, yep, okay. So that covered that piece. Now the one thing I want to show you too is, so we saved a couple files. We have some saved in our persistent disk and we have some saved workspace bucket. You know, you can see them from here within the Jupyter notebook, but you also maybe want to see them in a point and click method. So we can open this. And now we have access to, clicking into here, we have access to our persistent disk and we can see what we've saved here, right here. So we've got our survey underscore df as a CSV. We've also got our survey plot as a PNG. And here's where we go. Like I said earlier, if you, let's say you want to download this plot because you want to use it for, you know, poster presentation or publication or something like that. From this window here, you could click the checkbox and then you can click download. That'll allow you to download this file. This is also where you can go if you want to delete files out of your persistent disk. You can check it and delete it here. And then so let's jump to Henry. Do you have the link for, or do you know the best way to access the GCP console?
Yeah, you're gonna want to like right click on the notebooks and the workspace storage option, like the name of your workspace and then the notebooks at the top.
Oh, right here.
Yeah. Or I mean, I guess, well, there's two ways. I guess you could do file open. That's probably a quicker way.
This
Or
one?
this is this gonna take you? That's gonna, you want the GCP. Okay, yeah, you have to go through the notebooks.
Okay.
Yeah, the file open will take you to the Jupyter menu from which you can download.
Yeah, I want to show them the point and click method of looking at their workspace bucket.
Gotcha. For the about, sorry, you're gonna need to go to the about page.
Oh, perfect.
And then
Yeah. Oh, here. Okay, so yeah, perfect. So for file management, you can go to browse files in the Google Cloud platform. So now you actually have access to the point and click viewable options of your workspace bucket. So like I said earlier, we did save a file to our workspace bucket using those snippets. And so now we can see those by, this is the name of our workspace. It should be, yeah. All right, let me see if this is right.
yeah, that is the name
Yeah.
of your workspace
Yeah,
bucket.
this is it.
I'll also add that while you can view the existence of whatever you've saved in the workspace bucket here, you cannot actually see it because it'll give you this permissions error, and you can't download or delete it from here. You have to download and delete from the Workbench, either in a cell of a notebook or using the command line interface.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay, perfect. Thank you for adding that. But yeah, so you can kind of see what's going on in your notebook, but like Henry said, you can't do. So as you can see, yes, you're like, okay, I just want to make sure that I did have the survey underscore df data frame saved to this workspace bucket. We can see it here. However, due to like permission rights, you can't do too much more than just see it from this area. So if we jump back to our notebook here, and Henry, I might have you walk me through this. What's the best method for deleting, like let's say we wanted to take out the survey data frame from our workspace bucket because we no longer need it in there.
Yeah, so you're just going to need to do an rm command, which is a system command. So you can copy the system, either of the system commands. Actually, yeah, that second one is the better one.
Okay.
No, sorry, the one you had
Oh,
before.
okay, perfect.
And you're just changing the well, if you want to delete a directory, it's going to be rm-r. But if you want to delete just a singular file, then
Yeah,
it's
let's
just
just say we want to delete the singular file.
yeah, then just replace the ls with an rm, and the asterisk is going to delete every single CSV file within the data folder. So you can change the asterisk to just the name of
Gotcha.
the file that you set,
Yeah,
or you can leave it if you know it's the only if it's the only CSV file in that folder, then you can just leave the asterisk. But yeah,
perfect. Okay, and then we can run that. And then if we want confirmation, we could probably jump back into here. Yeah. And let's go back. Let's reload. And then as you can see, there's no more data tab up here to even access it. So we know we confirmed that we deleted that file out of the workspace bucket.